Welcome to
I'm
listening
not
to
really
Paint
sure I
Dry.
want to answer that question, Mike. Not on air. Okay,
Not
go ahead. You can
anymore.
start now.
Thank you. Welcome to listening to Paint Dry, the live stream. We're still a podcast about the art and hobby of miniature painting. I'm Mike.
I'm Dan.
Thank you guys for joining us on another chapter of our continued quest to become better, braver, happier painters. Um, we are getting randomly gnome assaulted by Dev there at the front with a Relic Blade Mini. Which that's a rifle, but to me it looks like a pipe bomb. But
Yeah, it worked when you put that thing in front of it.
it's for that creature. It is a very unwieldy rifle as well. Okay, maybe.
Apparently, we just did
Well,
the
how do we want to
intro.
start? Huh?
So we already did the.
We, yeah.
I didn't prepare, so I don't have anything to say.
Dan, when was the last time you prepared? You didn't even prepare for last week when it was your show.
I know. I feel pretty bad about that too.
Yep. All right. So what are you
I don't
drinking,
even.
Dad?
I don't even wing it, dude. This is how my meetings at work go too. Now I know why I don't get promoted, and they're trying to get rid of all of us. It's all Dan's fault.
What are you drinking, Dad? No.
Yeah, not one bit. Watermelon is meant to be eaten, not pureed, not filtered, not drink, not frozen. Just pop it off the ground, cut it in half. Uh,
And I'm boring. I'm doing a polar dry orange dry juice thing.
oh, I'm doing good old H2O. If you could see it, probably not because my face is on the thing. Visible. It's invisible water. It
Invisible.
is so clean you can't see it.
There we go. So just a hobby desk update. I am still continuing to be on a boat. I'm actually pretty close to being done. I've got the mermaids blocked in, and all the lights are blocked in as far as like the windows. I'm going to do a yellow gradient in the windows in order to make them look like there's lights on or something. Although, I guess the ship only fights at night, so that maybe that's it. But yeah, that's almost done, and then so I'm pretty close to knocking that out and getting back to my personal projects. I've kind of mapped out a few things and um, ready to get back to my Galadriel bust and finish Odysseus. Doing the last wave of work on Odysseus, but that's kind of where I am. Dev, you're working on a gnome.
Oh, really? Actually, your stream isn't showing anything at all right now. Oh, there we are. You're talking about beer.
Yeah, it's a delay. Do we have any viewers besides you?
Just me. I is he on? I don't know if he's on or not right now. I don't know who's watching. No one's on
Who?
right now. What? There's I don't see anybody in the chat. Okay. Oh, that was last week's chat. Oh.
On mute. Well, that was fun. So, hello everybody. My name's Dev. You haven't actually heard anything I've said this entire live stream, it turns out, because I messed up the audio settings. So go me. I'm glad I checked that. This
Oh man.
in the call. But yeah. So
That means you have to listen to Mike all over again.
No, we don't. Let's just move on.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm painting up this little gnome dude that you just saw me zoom in on, and we're back with an actual show, and 3 presenters instead of just 2. Oh,
Yeah, you'll miss out on great conversation.
Watermelon beer. It's as disgusting as it sounds.
Yeah, and that was our recap from the last 5 minutes.
There we go. The important things are covered. The beer, the miniatures. Oh, well, I mean, we got Mike's miniature already, so. Dan, what have you been working on? What have you been working on, Dan?
So I moved my fish, or in the process of moving my fish, from a 500 square foot apartment to a 3,000 square foot apartment. So right now I'm in the middle of cleaning up the tank and moving my fish on over. So I've been working on that for last week, trying to get my water parameters going, get the temperatures right, bought new equipment, and should be kind of fun. Did some tank scaping or aquarium scaping to make it a nice habitable place.
And this is, I'm assuming, square footage scaled down to fish scale?
Yes, to gallon. So 5-gallon tank to a 30-gallon tank.
Okay.
I was gonna say, because that's bigger than my house.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's hobby number 8 that I am currently working on. So for all you guys keeping track out there.
Is one of those hobbies miniature painting?
That's number 11.
Okay. That registers. Yeah, that seems about right.
Oh, actually, that's not true, because 11 is the number of listeners we have. So I can't use that number. So I need to find another number in there somewhere.
You know, or just find another hobby to insert in there somewhere.
We could, yeah.
Have you considered fishing?
I used to fish when I was younger.
Time to
I
pick
taught
it
my
back
kids
up,
how
man.
to fish.
Time to pick it back up.
No, I'm not a fan of fishing. I mean, I'm catch and release.
Dude,
I really don't like cleaning fish.
Stop putting off our listeners. I'm sure at least 3 of the 11 listeners are fishermen, right? We cannot afford to be losing listeners at this point.
They probably are.
Technically, they're viewers if they're watching this on YouTube. And I know they're not listening to it because these episodes never seem to make it onto the podcast feed.
So apparently we have one person on right. Oh, we have a bunch of people now. Now they can hear you, hopefully.
Wow, Dev has been holding that one for a while.
I know.
Passive aggressive, baby. Passive aggressive.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that was just straight up aggressive.
Hey, Dan.
Oh, yeah. There's Sean. Hey, Sean, I sent you a message on Discord. Please, read it. Maybe we have some good stuff in there.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the video, guys. That is entirely on me. In future weeks, we're going to have Dan hosting the OBS, which means we should have a better quality stream. I am going to remember local recordings, and I'll probably switch to uploading local recordings for the ones that I do so that replay is better quality, but it's a live stream. It would be better if the live stream was actually decent quality. So we're figuring it out, but at the moment my internet is not up to streaming, it turns out. So we do have a topic for today, and the topic is the differences between scale modeling and the importance or the focus of scale modeling, the judging criteria for scale modeling, and miniature painting, gaming, painting, figure painting, outside of the IPMS sphere, I would say. And I think we're specifically focusing on like competition painting focus differences, rather than just the fact that ultimately these are meant to be gamed with rather than sat on a shelf and admired from a distance. But you can do either with them. So, you want to kick it off, Mike?
Sure. So, having now judged at both type of conventions, there are similarities and there are differences. It's really, I'm in a unique spot because the figure painting group that I'm a part of, that Dan may or may not be a part of, we don't know if he's paid his dues in the last 3 years, but he does
That's
show
not
up.
true. I know I've had to pay my dues. If they've given me pizza or a box lunch, I've had to pay my dues.
No, Darcy's just really nice. So
Really?
yeah, I don't know. I
Wow,
don't know.
y'all making me feel bad.
I'm busting your chops about it. I don't, because like a few years ago you joined the IPMS instead of the NCMSS. Like you joined the wrong group.
Yeah, but you said everybody's the same, so it's just.
Well, some of which you don't get as many heavy armor modelers and stuff in the NCMS
I guess
side.
I need to look at my card and see what it says.
Right. Your membership card.
Maybe
I'll let
not.
you know when I get one. But so having judged both is really interesting, and I would have to feel like some of this is going to be almost regional. So at the Richmond IPMS show called the Old Dominion Open, which technically isn't actually an IPMS show. Um, there's also one in Fairfax for the Northern Virginia modelers. There's one in the Maryland area and one in the DC area as well. I haven't been to those two. And then you also have a show like the National Capital Model Soldier Society annual show, and then throw in something like the Nova Open. So in the area, within a couple hours drive, there's a lot of opportunities to go to different shows. IPMS is just kind of a different beast from the NCMS show, which is a figure painting show, and the Nova Open Capital Palette, which does have ordnance categories, but is not. It is definitely more focused on the artistic side rather necessarily than, let's say, the historical accuracy side. And I feel like at least here on the East Coast, there's an evolution in the IPMS figure painting because the Richmond and Fairfax shows have figure painters come judge now. And so that's a relatively recent development that we've actually taken over kind of the judging of those categories. Um, However, there is still a dominance of ordnance. I mean, each IPMS show has upwards of 100 plus categories, and 90 something of them are typically something to do with ordnance. And you get like very broad categories for figure painting. So you'll get historical one size, historical another size, historical busts, and then mounted. And then you'll get fantasy, sci-fi, can sometimes be the same category, or you have fantasy and sci-fi separated, and then they have a couple to three Gundam categories. Which, while Gundam are not figure painting necessarily, is definitely a divergence from what ordnance painting would be or typical historical modeling would be. I think that um, in places like the Richmond show and at the NCMS show, there's been a huge acceptance of Gundam, and I was really surprised at Richmond this year that they literally had a table and a half of Gundam entries, which was awesome. I guess Gundam is pretty big in middle of Virginia, but
I think
anyways,
honestly, Gundam is pretty big everywhere now. It's just it is the form of modeling that the Gen Z are discovering through increasingly. I think it's, wargaming and miniatures gaming, especially Games Workshop, is still there. But I think increasingly Gundam is a more affordable, more accessible way of getting in. And as anime and manga kind of become more mainstream, access to those shows and driving those shows into the figure market and being able to have an entire kit to play around with for $10-15 is a huge difference to anything you can really get from Games Workshop. I mean, I've literally been working on a little Harupla just for some fun kind of break. It's a very different...
That's really cute. You made a ball.
I made a ball with ears, flappy ears. Haru.
Yeah, there was one of those at the Richmond show that was automated with LEDs.
Nice.
It made me smile.
Yeah.
It made me so happy just to sit there and watch that thing.
I think I would maybe take a step back, right? I think one of the core differences between IPMS and most other competitions at this point is the method of judging. IPMS is a podium judged system, which means that there's a first, second, third in each category, and most other judging is just gold, silver, bronze. And the reason that that's important is because that explains the category creation. Because in IPMS shows, typically you don't want more than about a dozen, maybe 20 entries in a single category. If there are an excessive number of entries in a single category, typically the judges will make a decision to then split that category up. And this is how you end up with hundreds and hundreds of categories. And eventually, after a while, some categories will get grandfathered in. So even if there's only one or two entries, they're still just a standalone category. To kind of demonstrate the propensity of categories, within aircraft, you will have aircraft 1/72nd scale or smaller, single engine, propeller, fighter plane, World War II or earlier, for instance, or World War... And if that category is too big, which it often is, it's a popular category. You're talking Messerschmitts, you're talking Spitfires, Hurricanes, Wildcats, and all the various American aircraft that were of the World War II era. Lots and lots of people like doing those. Those are the ones that most of us who started with Airfix or Revell kits probably have built one of those at some point. Oftentimes you'll then split into Axis versus Allies, right? So the Messerschmitts and the Focke-Wulfs will get put into one category.
Watch your language. It's a family podcast.
The other category will be your Wildcats, Hellcats, not Tomcats, too late. Wildcats, Hellcats, Spitfires, Hurricanes. They'll all be in the Allied split. And then maybe you'll split them up even further. You may go US, UK, you may go German, Italy, Japan. So that you have a reasonable number of entries to judge against each other to provide those 1, 2, 3 finishes. But then, there are some categories that may not have a lot of entries that will all still keep separate categories because trying to judge them comparatively is very difficult. So in our area, there aren't generally that many ship entries. Ship is often a single category, but even then it may only have 2 or 3 entries. So that is the reason for the high number of categories in IPMS shows. And the reason that figures don't typically get split is because they're not particularly prominent in most of these competitions. And I think part of the reason is that the judging criteria for IPMS shows has been very much designed to focus on construction of the kit over and above painting of the kit. And where painting is considered, the considerations are fairly simplistic. Things like shadows and highlights representing for scale are not focused on nearly as much with scale modeling and the IPMS grading system as they are with other grading systems. And I think that plays a big part in it. As Mike said, right, in clubs where figure painters are coming in to start judging the figures section, where Gundam modelers are coming in to start judging the Gundam categories, that is changing. It is often to wailing and gnashing of teeth, because in order to do that, you're moving away from IPMS national judging standards, because those haven't really changed. And honestly, there is quite a lot of resistance, I think, to making significant changes to them, to the detriment of IPMS as a group as a whole. But that is, I feel like the main difference is things in scale modeling are judged primarily off of build, with painting as a secondary consideration. Things in figure painting are judged primarily off of painting, with construction being a kind of element that is a rather fundamental but basic component, right? If you build terribly, it's going to be difficult to do well in a figure painting competition, but it's still only going to account for maybe 25% of the consideration at most, whereas I think it would be more like 70 or 80% of the consideration for scale models. I also think that makes a lot of sense.
The only thing I would throw in,
yeah, go for it.
Before you move on from that, Deb, the only thing I would add is, though, in figure painting, the cardinal no-nos are still the same as far as modeling goes. Mold lines, no-no. Gaps, no. Those will knock you right out of podium contention in a figure painting show or in an IPMS show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those are still kind of the universals, and those are going to be your bigger. Those are going to be the main construction build stuff that people are going to judge look for when they're judging.
Yeah. And it's a much bigger element of building a scale model than it is building a scale figure. Ultimately is what it comes down to. Scale models are frequently 200 plus parts, even for a fairly small model. Oftentimes you're building full interiors in addition to the exterior. When you are putting photo etch, straps and restraints onto a seat of a 1/72 scale fighter plane with a canopy over it so that you can barely even see it once it's complete without using a flashlight to look inside, that's a degree of complexity that we probably aren't really approaching in most cases, even with quite high performing figure painting entries. There's a lot more flexibility there. Often the subjects are more fantastical, so there is a little bit more allowance for realism as well. So I think that those are the two things. One is the focus on construction. The other is the podium finish versus the open judging models. And between those two things, we see a huge delta in what's considered. And I think it also results in accessibility issues for figure painters. I have a friend who is a very good figure painter, and he will go to Region 9 IPMS shows because he is a member of a Region 9 club, and he loves the club, and he hangs out with them, and he'll travel with them to shows, and he will put his figures in to compete in those shows, and he will invariably miss out on podium or miss out on gold, at least, quite often the entire podium, to pieces that he and I would both consider less good, because he is painting in, I would say, a more artistic style than a technical style. He will use shades and colors that are very much artistic considerations. He will do contrasting shadows, not just flat black shadows. Things like that don't tend to show very well in IPMS judging because the judging criteria just doesn't account for it.
You know what? One of the other things is that's a huge, huge difference between the two types of shows. IPMS has a tendency to be street judges. People that have come into the show, they recruit judging people to come in, and so it's not like a Nova Open or a Resin Beast where you have hired artists to be the judges, you know, and like so. A lot of times you will get people that, I mean, I've seen teenagers judging at IPMS shows.
That is true, and I think that's often, and I'm going to upset some people here. I think that's often a sign of a less well-run IPMS show, because I do know IPMS shows where the judges are chosen in advance, or at the very least, the head judges for each category or for each broad group are chosen in advance. Usually, judging groups will be split out so that you can judge multiple things at the same time, but you will generally have maybe like a judging group to do aircraft, a judging group to do armor, a judging group to do auto, a judging group to do figures, a judging group to do diorama, something like that. And those judges will go through those various categories within those groups. At the bare minimum, I think head judges should be selected in advance for each of those groups, as well as the overall show head judge. Oftentimes, at least for Region 9, it tends to be the same judges at a lot of the shows. You know, you'll go to a show, you're known by the various clubs. They'll be like, hey, can you help judge today? And you'll say, yeah, sure, but I can't do X, Y, and Z because I've entered into those categories. They'll say, that's fine. How do you feel about judging A? You know, auto maybe or whatever. And you'll say, yeah, sure, let's do it. And that's the way it will typically go. Obviously, you know, you're looking at trying to get a pool of 15, 20 judges, right? That's a lot of judges, which is why having half a dozen head judges that you know and are calibrated and that can guide the other two judges, it's typically a judging group of 3 per category, can be very helpful. But it does tend to be much more of a street urban situation of just like bring in the punters, get them into the judging teams if needed. There is, I feel, unfortunately, an exception to that, where some IPMS clubs will have certain members that always do the judging, which can be fine. It can be great. They can be known. They can calibrate year over year. You can get really good experience doing that. But there are definite instances where it just turns into favoritism. There are shows that I will attend but not enter anything into because I know that the judging is run by a group of people that will just give awards to their friends, at which point I have no interest in participating in that.
Right.
So yeah, as you said, you know, for figure painting, for figure modeling, it's usually a group of fairly well-known artists within the community or something like that who will judge every time. And I think also like you know, even game stores, when game stores do painting competitions, they will often aspire to do a similar kind of thing. They will get, you know, people in the local area that they know that are, you know, respected painters to provide the judging. Whether they are good judges is a different matter, but they're at least kind of known to the people entering, which I think helps a lot and gives a lot of more culpability to them.
Right, and you one of the bigger things that's missing from IPMS shows that is in a Capital Palette or in a ReaperCon, that you do get an opportunity to get feedback from the judges. Where IPMS, you have no idea who judged you, and so you get no feedback. You just know whether or not, you know, and it's tough. It can be, honestly, it can be really tough to feel like you're. My IPMS medals that I've won have only been in the last year and a half, 2 years maybe. Before that, I would enter stuff that I thought was pretty good. Pretty much, it like was decent, probably in the top 5, and never placed for years. I actually was like on the verge of stop. Dan made me go to one, and so that's why I went back to going to IPMS shows. And so I had stopped because I was just like, why? The most of the vendors there are and that's another big difference between those type of shows too, is the type of vendors that you're going to get. You're not, I mean, if you're in if you're on the East Coast, you have a large possibility of there only being one hobby, like painting guy with paint and tools and stuff like that. He is at all the East Coast shows. Dan knows who I'm talking about, because even when we went to the AMP show in Newport News prior to taking Banshee's class in Norfolk, that guy was there too. He had the largest area, like, and so we see kind of that one vendor, whereas a ReaperCon or a Nova, and more so at the Capitol Palette, you have a much larger selection of vendors. Adepticon is even another level higher than that as far as vending options. I mean, would you agree with that, Dan? Adepticon versus Nova, much larger vendor
Well,
selection.
they have much more space, and I think
True.
there's more games that try to demo, or companies trying to, or vendors trying to sell their products. And space does allow for more of that, without
Right.
having to pick and choose who can come in. If you have a smaller venue, and we all know that Adepticon's moving to a different city, and they have a much larger space now. So I would imagine that their vendor space will be even larger, and they'll have more selection of vendors. Of course, for us that spend money on things that they don't plan on painting, or buying equipment they don't want to use, that's a gold mine. That's a great place for me to throw money at people. So.
It's interesting that you say that, because I actually thought it was a peculiarity of Region 9 that we have, usually a pretty good turnout of vendors, but the vast majority of those vendors are members of various clubs selling old kits. Or the one or two vendors that kind of do the rounds are selling aftermarket kits, decal sheets, that kind of thing. Maybe more, expensive, more hard to find kits.
Well, even our local ones that we go to, they're like that. You have the
Yeah.
folks that, will buy a table or two,
Yeah.
and they have models back from when they were kids, and they're trying to sell those.
Yeah.
Then we have, let's see, I'm trying to think of uh,
We
the
get the
Capital
Flint
one.
guy, Jacob Jansen.
Yeah, we have the resin guy, where you normally have a
Yeah.
guy who sells plinths.
Yeah.
There's like the Gundam guy that has like high precision models,
Yeah.
like really high quality models. Those are always really cool. And then we have our normal vendor that has all the paints and all the tools. And there's really cool tools that you see out there that you never would thought in a million years that would exist, or if you even needed them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we have the same
Yeah.
ones.
I mean, it's just, for me, it feels a missed opportunity that you don't have anyone selling paints. We don't really have anyone selling tools, generally. No local gaming stores. I feel like it's an easy opportunity. Like, tables at these shows are really quite cheap, right? A gaming store doesn't, especially compared to conventions, right? Like, the price you'd pay for a table at an IPMS show is peanuts compared to even one day of Adepticon or one day of Nova, right?
Mhm.
Like, if
Right.
you're local to the area, right, you've probably got a truck already, or a pickup or whatever, right? You just put some stuff in it, you go for the day, you get just yourself and a volunteer or whatever, right? You have your usual stuff back at the store. Maybe you'll sell some stuff, maybe you won't. But IPMS goers bring their kids along. Their kids are usually bored out of their minds, right? Have some family games there.
Yeah.
Have a selection of paints. I think the paints is less appealing in IPMS shows, because I think a lot of scale modelers have the paints that they know and trust, that are color matched to what they're doing, the areas that they have interest in, right? And if you try and take Tamiya away from a hobby modeler, you're going to have a very, very angry hobby modeler on your hands.
Yeah, and they can be very, very peculiar and particular about those colors, like you were saying. And I think some of those techniques are also geared towards like using or methods are using airbrushing and that sort. When you're talking about like vehicles and like that, but miniatures, of course, or bust, you would normally have just paintbrush and traditional styles. So I can see that where it's just like, hey, I have my man or my vendor, and I can go to them all the time, and I order 15 of these little bottles of this particular color because I know this is the color I'm going to be using.
Yeah.
Because I paint the same plane all the time, or I just need this one bottle of color because I know this is the one that they said I need to have.
Yeah, I mean,
so why go find it there?
Yeah,
so maybe it's go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if your interest is World War II German aircraft, then you're going to be using the same 4 or 5 colors repeatedly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you change combat zone, you're going to mix it up a bit. If you go to the desert, then you're gonna switch color schemes a little bit. But a lot of the time, it's Luftwaffe color schemes are pretty consistent across the board. So the need for experimentation maybe just isn't there to the same extent.
Well, and here's the question too: is that part of the problem with some of the hobby in that sense that you have where the resistance to change is and an evolution in IPMS, because you have the same people painting the same stuff repeatedly and over, and the IPMS is where they go to showcase their stuff, and now they're like, oh my god, what is all this fantasy crap?
I want to see think about that though. I mean, let's say that we go to a miniature type of convention. Let's use Adepticon, for example. And how many of these people would look strange at someone who brought like an airplane in or something? It's just what they like, and maybe that's where it's geared towards. We know that in our community, we're trying to get the historical folks over. We're trying to get the folks that do armors and airplanes that come into Capital Palette. Just like the other local art shows are trying to get miniatures over, because we have to try to cross-pollinate.
Yeah.
But hey, if your interest is airplanes and tanks, because I drove a tank for 35 years in the military, that's all I really want to paint. Yeah. If I liked airplanes as a kid, that's all I want to paint. I don't care about 40K. I don't care about BattleTech.
And I think what I would say is first of all, I mean, it's not just Warhammer models that they have looked askance at in the past, okay? And I think generally speaking, IPMS is moving in a good direction here. I think it's much more accepting now than it was even 5 years ago. But in the past, there have been other trends that have kind of come along and have not necessarily been welcomed. I mean, paper model was a huge thing for a while, and faced a lot of pushback within the IPMS community. I think before that it was the wooden builders, right? Wooden model builders will build things from blueprints, from scratch, right? They're not just assembling a kit. Everything is basically completely custom. But they don't really ever find a home in IPMS. And, the P in IPMS is plastic, right? So maybe there is some argument for that. Mm-hmm. But I think the same is true on the other side, right? If you go 5 or 10 years ago to a gaming convention with a painting element to it, I think you would find that like 80+% of those models were Games Workshop, right? You weren't seeing Ral Partha miniatures there. You probably weren't seeing Reaper miniatures there, unless it was ReaperCon. The vast majority would have been Warhammer models, because those were the games that were being played. Maybe you'd see some War Machine. I think War Machine really broke into that in a way that other stuff hasn't. But I don't think you would have seen more obscure stuff, right? Like, I don't think you'd have seen Full Thrusts models entered, Dystopian Wars models entered. They didn't receive the same level of acceptance. And that's even just within the gaming scene. And that's at conventions that aren't, Games Workshop owned and operated.
Yeah, we still see that. It's probably not as high percent, but it's still a very large percentage is still going to be GW stuff. I think it's just
I
the
do think
availability
it's
of it.
yeah, I think it's changed a lot quite quickly because the top entries are very rarely Games Workshop things.
True. Yeah.
And so there's a demonstration there that Games Workshop is not the only way to win. They're not always the best figures for painting
That's why we look.
competitions.
That's why they always look for price support from other vendors just to expand it out, or that's why vendors want to be sponsors of different awards or going to these different conventions to get their name out. I mean, that's part of the marketing thing, and they have to be able to do that to sell their product.
Yeah.
Agreed. That was more of a devil's advocate question because I find the whole process fascinating about joining the groups together and seeing when there's resistance. I'm curious about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what causes that resistance? Because when you look at it, both historical and gaming and figure painting, you always need a youth inflection in order to keep the hobby alive and keep it available and growing.
I think
so
I think there is one aspect of scale modeling that is really does not cross over, and it doesn't form part of the competition, but it does form a big part of the motivation. And that is, for a lot of scale modelers, the research is a huge component of what they're doing. Right now, strictly speaking, IPMS judging does not factor in realism. It does not factor in accuracy. Some judges do, but it is not actually an official part of the judging criteria. But it is a huge part of most scale modelers' motivation, right? If they're into auto, I promise you that if they've been into auto for 5-10 years, they have made a reproduction of a car they have owned or wanted to own at some point. If they're and they've probably done it like perfect accuracy. If they're into historic, they probably have a favored topic. They will have done a piece that is a reproduction of something of some significance to them, right? Very good friend of mine at my local IPMS club made a ship that his father was stationed on. He fixed it for an exact period in time and made a beautiful, complete, perfect reproduction of that based off of photos, based off of documentation that he could find. All of that research is a big part of the project. And I don't think we ever really get to embrace that in the same way for figure painting. We may do a lot of research into color choices, into moods, mood boards, palette, techniques, things like that. We may create a story for the piece, but we're not going to those same depths, right? Maybe if we're reproducing a piece of classical artwork or something like that, we will look a little bit more into the background of that, the decisions behind it, that artist's particular style and techniques and color choices, but it doesn't really have that same historical research element to it as in my mind.
I bet you could probably do a study on that particular project or that idea. If you think about the mentality of gamers and where most of the miniature figure spawned off from, they're probably more free thinkers. They equate winning with sports, so my guys are going to be my sports team colors, whereas more regimented process folks would probably like, hey, let me do the research on this. I want to know what this perfect color was for this 1969 Mustang, and look into that, because maybe they don't have the means of doing it for a full-size vehicle, but maybe the small plastic one can suffice. And having a connection with something is definitely a draw on why you would do that. My grandfather fought in this war, and this is the weapon they had, or this is the type of airplane or tank they drove in, or my dad was a race car driver, so I'm going to make a model that's that. So there's those connections, and I think that connection side fits more with those historicals, more with the reality that we live in, rather than. And I'm not saying this is true, just the theory and hypothesis. But maybe the more free thinkers, the more of like, hey, let's give this game a try. Is what draws the figure painters,
And
because we don't rely on we have to make, like you said, you have to make your own story and your own narrative, because I don't know what a space marine is going to look like in real life 40,000 years in the future.
yeah,
But we can sure guess it, and if I can make it this colors, because that's my favorite football team, then that's what I'm going to do.
yeah, and there are scales, right? So, for instance, if you go into historic wargaming, if you're looking at Napoleonics or ACW or AWI, those have got historical accuracy. You've got the opportunity to do research, right? If you think of the John Brown diorama from ReaperCon this year that was doing the rounds, that's a great example, right? It was based on a classical piece of art. It was very much figure painting, but it's based on a historical fact and all the research that goes into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you kind of move it more into the gaming side, away from historical wargaming, you've got another step in between, right? You've got Horus Heresy, you've got Warhammer: The Old World, right? And you've got narrative gamers as well, right? Where they're actually taking the fake histories of those universes and reproducing them, recreating them with some accuracy to redo Istvan 5 or Istvan 4 or Istvan 3 or whatever, to get those chapters looking the way they did in those time frames, using the power armor that they were purportedly using in those time periods. Or in Warhammer: The Old World, you can reproduce the Bretonnian Knights' exploration of Lustria and have them going through those forests, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think some of that connection also crosses over to things like Blood Bowl. Like, for example, my friend who had passed, all of his Blood Bowl stuff that I painted for him were all that he wanted his high school colors, his high school football team colors for everything. And so, that was his connection to it. Even honestly, it was pretty much everything was his high school colors. Like, even his X-wings were done in that color scheme when I did his X-wing models. So yeah, there's definitely connections there. I think those are increasing. We're gonna see in a few years, maybe even it might be a little bit longer, but I think we'll see some of that in the gaming world too, as father son daughter, mother daughter, whatever the relationship of people painting things the way their dad did when he or she gamed, or what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, we're already seeing some
So,
element of that with Oldhammer, right? It's
what?
Oldhammer.
True, very true.
Mm-hmm.
So
But we're in that
Very.
generation now,
yeah,
where those D&D folks and the first generation of BattleTech and Warhammer players are having children. Don't know how we're procreating, but we are. And the kids are now becoming that age where they're either just now getting interested in it, or at least curious about what it is. What's all this paint on this table, and what's all this stuff? And let me give it a try. And nope, this sucks. I'm going to go play my video games for another 20 years. And then I'll get back into it when I realize that it's cool.
Hey, look, girls.
always the way. Always the way. So Birdcart is trolling us on Dan's Matrix control room versus the two of us being in the real world. So Dan
Yep.
is
Who is that?
Dan went for this is Birdcart. Dan has opted for the blue pill a little faster than we did, so you know.
Well, because my room is not compatible with video.
We got to
You
get
have
we
all
got to
your
get Dan a
porn
fake
wall, is that
backdrop.
what it is?
Is I think the answer. We got to
I
get
have one.
a real world fake backdrop. When you hold up a miniature, it doesn't just turn invisible on you.
Oh, like this one? Oh, I don't have one this time.
Or do you?
But baby shark. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, so
Well,
you can't see it.
welcome everybody who is listening to us drone on for a while.
Can't see this stupid
Really,
thing.
Remember,
no, you
I
can't.
literally showed Dan how to do this, like right before the call. Just hold it in front of your chest, like it'll work.
Will it?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't see anything.
All right,
Right,
job,
because
good
your
job, Dan.
chest is lower than. There
There
you
you go. It was on camera.
Your chest was lower than your camera was, because you're almost laying vertical,
Dan has
Yeah, something
been
like that.
slaughtered by left shock.
horizontal. Sorry.
I am. I'm actually laying down right now. So if I turn my camera on, you would just see my bed and my Barbie sheets.
Mhm.
I really hope they're Princess Barbie.
It's
So
not the
one
Princess
thing I want
Barbie.
to emphasize though is IPMS. Its reach is broad across the United States. I mean, just in Northern Virginia alone, I mean, we have 3 different groups. And then in the DMV, there's 1 in DC, there's 4 or 5 in Maryland as well, and then Pennsylvania and West Virginia. North Carolina has multiple IPMS groups, and so just as um, an opportunity to get out and meet people, get out and see some models. I know we have a friend. I have a friend who used to do some printing for me that lives in the neighborhood, and he's gone out to like some local shows and really enjoyed it. Even though he's not a big I don't know if he's a big painter or not. We've only really talked mostly about printing and such, but I do know that he has enjoyed himself, and so it's nice, you know what I mean? It's a nice way to see different worlds, still meet people. There's a lot of great people. I mean, I know people have heard horror stories about, I guess at IPMS National there was a big controversy over picking up models and disqualifying, overriding judges and stuff like that. That's not the competition shouldn't be the point of being there. What going there is an opportunity to meet like-minded people. Maybe you can find somebody to paint with. I know that I always paint better with somebody kind of pushing along and painting too. Um, and so, it's just an excellent opportunity for you to be, a better, braver, happier painter by meeting other people.
Yeah.
Like how I worked that in there. I worked that in there, yeah.
Seamless. And the call out especially. The call out was.
I'm glad I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. But it's really kind of cool. There's the mecca of figure painting is happening this weekend, and that would be Mont Sansovino in good old-fashioned Italy. And I know there's a lot of American painters that are making the trip over for the first time, like Vince Venturella and Sam Lenz. And so I'm looking forward to having conversations with them about their experience going from. I'm not sure if Sam or Vince have done much of the IPMS world in general. So it'll be interesting to see. I would imagine Vince probably is more likely to have than Sam, but that's just my guess. But it could be that they both are frequent IPMS shows, and I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So
it's sometimes surprising, actually, the figure painters that you discover are actually fairly frequent attendees of their local IPMS club or something, and you're just like, I never would have seen that. But
well, I mean, you can imagine it's like, hey, there's a model convention down the road. Let's just go to it. I mean, if I lived in an area that had, conventions all the time, I mean, it could be a Gundam convention, it could be airplane or
I would
figures.
love
It doesn't matter. I would just go, just because that's still within the realm of what our hobby is. Building things. Building things and painting things.
And
And
I
usually
think,
they're
yeah, for a lot of us, it was also the first thing we saw, right? Before we saw gaming figures in the shops. I know for me, for a couple of years before I ever discovered Games Workshop or Warhammer, I was painting Airfix kits. Sean on the chat is saying he started with model cars. Birdcart is saying that they've got some 1-to-1 Ferrari replica cars, which they're almost done with, and a 1/18th version of the model, which is being converted to match the 1-on-1. It's just a very cool way of enjoying things that you're passionate about, to kind of have that that pocket version of it that you've also put care and love and effort into.
Right, but that also, now what you also kind of touched into a very different hobby type of show, car shows, where a lot of them don't even have painting competitions, that it's just there to show and talk. And I'm wondering if our viewer, what is it, Birdcart?
Birdcart, C-A-R-T. Sorry,
Birdcart.
the British accent is kicking in again.
Birdcart.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm wondering, are you working on a factory finish, or is there going to be environmental aspects to the car? Because I know I've seen, you kind of have a similar situation with Gundam, where you have factory finish, weathered paint, you know what I'm saying, like that same thing. I didn't know if that translates into like the model car world.
I think it does, honestly. It's interesting where Gundam has overlap and differences. The fashion, the trend for the longest time in the car world has very much been factory condition, finish. Building cars, if you've not done it, if you're a figure painter or if you're a wargamer, building cars is a really, really interesting exercise. I think a lot of the stuff for aircraft and armor is fairly intuitive, right? You've got to be careful about your build quality and stuff like that, and it does encourage little things like that, but you can get something that looks really quite good reusing a lot of your existing skills in an out-of-the-box condition. If you want to go crazy and make super hyper accurate and start putting rivets on, that's another matter. But to get a really good finish on a car is a whole world of skill sets that you just do not have any reason to use in figure painting. To get that beautiful, perfect, pristine, clean finish on a car body paint job, I still can't get my head around how to do that, right? With all of the careful layers of paint and the dip coating and everything to get, pristine, clean glass and really, really shiny bodywork. And that's before you even start messing around with things like metallics or pinstriping or any of that kind of stuff, because you think, oh yeah, it's just freehand work, right? Pinstriping is ultimately freehand work unless you're using decals or something. But dang, that takes a steady hand that I do not have.
Well, it's just different. I mean,
it is. Yeah.
That the guys that talk about putting car models together are having the same thing. Like, man, you know how hard it is to paint a face? Holy crap! How in the world do they paint a freaking face and eyeballs and
it's
put people in
it's
there?
just a completely different skill set.
Exactly.
Tank
It's
modelers
just
have
not.
the same problem with figures. Tank modeler. I constantly hear tank modelers talking at IPMS shows and at our show about painting faces and stuff along those lines. They're just, and because for them, a lot of times they have a pilot who the biggest part of the model, the figure that's in there is just the face hanging out of the tank. You know what I mean? And so, that's an area that they can struggle with too. So, what did Birdcart respond?
No more input from Birdcart yet, but
He probably left.
I'll put it
He's
in.
like, this is not the kind of model show I was thinking about. And then he left.
But I don't know if you guys, I don't know if NNL East still happens. NNL is a group of automotive modelers. They run, there's NNL West, which sadly, I think this coming January is going to be the last ever NNL West. But I think NNL East may still be going. There is no competition. Modelers will come, they'll put their cars on display. That's it.
Well,
And
maybe that's the purity of modeling,
I
is
think-
you're just going to show,
yeah,
like old school, like 17 and 1800s, where you got all your, your boys together and you all painted and you showed what kind of, like, hey, this is just still life I just did.
but also it's just
and you just show
taking
it.
kind of the car show mentality and putting it in models, right? You know, most car shows, it's not a competition. You go, you show your
Yeah,
car.
it's just showing things off. Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice. The NNL West used to be a highlight of the calendar for a lot of us in IPMS.
Could you imagine how low stress that would be to go to a place where you display your figure and not have any expectation of competition or winning anything, just going just to show your stuff off? I think that would be just a different environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of figure painting shows, if anybody's listening or watching this, November 15th, 16th.
See you, Birdcart. Have fun.
Have a great night. Is the Long Island show is this weekend as well. The Long Island Figure Painter Show.
Oh, that's a
that
big one,
actually is-
right?
Yeah, it is a pretty well attended show. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
think I'm not going to make that one.
No, I would have gone if I was supposed to teach a class on Saturday again, and they just canceled on me today. So, I don't have the ability.
Well, maybe Saturday I might have something for you on Saturday. So maybe we can meet or something, have a lunch.
How long of a drive is Long Island for you guys? It must be a good few hours.
That's like 8. Is it?
No,
what is it for
6.
you?
6.
Okay. So 8 for me, since it takes 2 hours to get out of my fucking city.
Yeah, I thought about in the past it's been a little bit earlier, so it's interfered with my anniversary weekend, and so
man, everybody with their anniversaries, like, well, I can't go do this because I got an anniversary coming up. That's why you have your anniversaries at weird times of the year where it doesn't interfere.
Isn't
or
this
don't
what
get
divorce
married.
is for? Yeah.
Yes, that's what divorce is for, right? Exactly. Divorce and child abandonment. That's what this is for.
All right.
You know how many people jokingly said, why didn't I go to the open? Dropping off a kid is not an excuse. You know? They're like, they're an adult now. Don't you just throw them in the water?
This is the whole thing that you've been waiting for, is for them to hit 18 and leave the house. Why are you still attaching yourself?
Right, exactly.
It never ends. It never ends. I'm 28 years old. I'm still going to go hang. That's a whole other story.
I can tell you from experience, if you can convince the kids to move to a different continent, that'll do it for you. You'll be free then.
That'll keep.
Yeah.
I've tried. My kids don't want to leave the States for some reason. So.
Oh, are you sure?
I don't know.
I think the next 4 years might change that.
I don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
Not even to touch that with a 10-foot pole. All right.
That's why we have tea. That's why we have tea parties there, Dev.
Tea bagging? Is that what you said?
Tea bagging the tea parties, yeah. It's a tea bagging tea party for the Brits.
Tea bagging tea party.
Mitch McConnell will be so happy. All right, we should end this before we get any further into this rabbit hole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't matter what type of show you go to. You can always work towards being a better, braver, happier painter.
You can always become a better, braver, happier painter by trying a different type of modeling.
And you could be a better, braver, happier painter if you just painted.
True. So for those listening or viewing, please hit the like, subscribe button, hit notifications to let you know when we are going to go live again, which is every Thursday. We'll be back next week. It'll be just Deb and Dan because I am, according to Dev, going to watch a and egg game. I'm a huge Steelers fan. Steelers are playing the Browns, and I was invited to a party quite a long time before we were live streaming on Thursday. So, but so you won't see me until the other side of Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving from me, because I know we're not going to do a stream Thanksgiving week. So
I guess.
thanks for watching.
Bye bye, everybody.